Okay, so welcome back to another tutorial, and in this video I'll be starting a new series, and in this series I'll be teaching you guys how you can script your own features by yourself without relying on these tutorial videos such as my own or someone else's. So yeah, this will be the first video, and in this video I'll be going over defining variables, the print function, if statements, and the for loop and the while loop. So those are the basic logic things that exist in almost any programming language. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into this. So you want to start by creating a script in server script service. So server script service basically runs the server script inside of it once you run the game. And once you have this ready, once you created the script, you'll be immediately greeted with print hello world. And yes, so I'll start with the print statement, which is the thing over here. Now the print statement prints anything between its parentheses into the output. So if I don't do anything and run it, it will print hello world inside of the output. So yeah, it's over here, print hello world, and then it'll be hello world in the output. Now you can also print different data types like numbers. You can also print variables, which I'll get to later. And it doesn't do anything to the game itself, so you can't change like properties with this function. It'll just put stuff into the output. Now you might think it's useless, but it's actually pretty useful while you're trying to debug things. So once you start making your own features and something goes wrong, you don't know where something went wrong, you can try printing out different variables and then see if the values match with your expectations. If they don't, then you know where's the problem. There are actually two variants of the print statement. The first one is the warn, hello world. So warn is the same as the print, but it just prints out in yellow. So you know it's a warning, so it's yellowish, not yellowish orange, or I don't know. Okay, so it'll just print stuff but in that color. And finally you have the error. Now the error is different from the print or the warn. Hello world. So it throws out an error, and it will stop the script because it throws out an error, and then it will error with the message that you put inside of it. So you can see that like it's an actual error, and it tells you where which line the error is on, and then it will give you the error message, which is the thing that you put inside of it. So yeah, these are the two variants of the print function. And now with that out of the way, I'll move on to defining and using variables. So variables are things that you define and things that have a value and they can change. So you can use the variable interchangeably with its value. So to define a variable, you can do the variable name equals to the value that you want to set it to. So for example, var equals to 10. So I have defined a new variable called var, and then set the value to 10. You can name the variable whatever you like. I think there are a few restrictions. You can't put numbers as the first character of the name, and there are also many other restrictions like special characters or whatever. So most of the time you should be fine. So yeah, you define a variable using the name, whatever you want, and then equals to the value. So now that you have the variable, you can now use it interchangeably with its value. For example, the print statement that we just learned. So if I print var, it will print var. Instead, it will print out the value of the variable, which is 10. And as you can see, 10 is printed in the output. Okay, so now that you define a variable and you can use it, now I'm going to tell you that most of the time in Roblox you want to define a variable locally. So you want to use a local keyword before defining your variable. Now what this does is that it makes your variable local, and it can only be used in the scope that it's defined in. So this might sound a bit confusing, but it will be cleared up once we get to the loops and if statements. So now what you need to know is that while you're defining a variable, you want to use the local keyword for most cases. So if it's outside of anything, it's not inside an if statement and it's not inside like a loop or something, then you almost certainly want to use a local variable, as it uses less memory space than a global variable, which is something that you define without the local keyword. And yeah, one more example. So you can also do local variable 2 equals to variable plus 3, and then variable 2 will be set to 13. So yeah, that's how you define and use variables. And next, I'll move on to the if statement. The if statement basically just executes a block of code if a condition is met. So, for example, if 10 is greater than 20, then print something, 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 and then it will not print because 10 is less than 20. So the basic syntax is if, and then condition, and you have a then, and then enter, and then you have an end at the bottom to end the if statement. So for the condition over here, you have many different conditional operators. So there's the smaller sign, there's the greater sign, there's the smaller equals to sign, there's a greater equals to sign, there's a not equals to sign, and then there's a equals to sign, which is 2 equal signs. So let me just list them all over here. Okay. So this is less than, greater, and then less than equals to, greater equals to, and then not equals to, and then equals to. So those are the conditional operators that you can use inside of your if statements. So for example, I'll just use the one that I just did. If 10 is less than 20, then print hello world. Hello world. So if I just run it, nothing will be printed in the output because 10 is not greater than 20. Oh wait, no, I used the less than sign. Okay, well then it will print. I used the less than sign. Okay, so if 10 is less than 20, then print, and then it printed. I mistyped the sign, so if 10 is greater than 20, then print hello world will obviously not print out anything. Okay. So, in the condition, you can use variables that you define. So, for example, local variable equals to 5, and then if variable is greater than 3, then print hello world. Well, then this will print because 5 is greater than 3. Okay. So yeah, that's the if statement. Now in the condition, actually, okay. So in the condition, you have multiple conditions, and you can use the and or the or keywords to group them together and let the script decide whether to execute the code or not. So you have and, which basically will run the code only if both conditions are met. So if variable is greater than 3 and variable is smaller than 10, then print hello world, and this will still print out because both of these conditions are met. So yeah, hello world. But if I do something like if var is smaller than 5, then it won't run because the variable 5 is not smaller than 5, so nothing prints out. Okay, so that's the and keyword, and there's also the or keyword, which basically runs it if one of these is true. So if variable is greater than 3 or variable is smaller than 4, actually that doesn't very well. If I run it, then it will still print because variable is greater than 3, even though it's not smaller than 4. Okay, so you have the and the or keywords, and then adding on to the if statement, you can have an else if statement and an else statement. So an else if statement there is also another condition. So if variable is greater than 3, I'll just make it 1. Okay. So if variable is greater than 3, then print hello world. Else if condition. So this part only runs if variable is smaller or equals to 3, because it's an else if. So if this part doesn't run, then check if this condition is true. So for example, else if variable it is smaller than 3, actually I'll do smaller than 6, okay, and then I'll do print okay, 6, and then if my variable is still 5 and then run it, what will happen is only hello world will print. The second part will not print. So you can see only hello world printed and this part will not print. And that is because in the first condition, variable is greater than 3 is already true. So it will just skip this else if statement, because the else if only runs if the previous condition is false. And also you can have multiple else ifs, which just build off each other and runs if all of these didn't run. And then you also have the else statement, which will run if the things before it, all the conditions before it all are false, and it will run like all the time if all the conditions before are false. So yeah, that's the if statement. You have the if then, and then else if then, and then else doesn't have a then, and it just end. Okay. So next, I'm going to move on to the different loops. So I'll start with the while loop, since I think that's easier. So the while loop, as you might guess, will run indefinitely until the condition is not met. So, the syntax is while condition do, and then you have an end at the end. Okay, so for example, while 10 is smaller than 20, print hello world. Actually, this is a very bad idea because it will run indefinitely, and I'll add a wait 0.5. So the wait basically just pauses the script for 0.5 seconds. The while statement, so while 10 is smaller than 20, which is always true, then it will indefinitely print hello world. So run it, and let's see. Yeah, so hello world is getting printed every 0.5 seconds because 10 is smaller than 20. Okay. So while condition do something, and you can put variables in this condition as in the if statement. However, what's good about this is that you can set the amount of times to run whatever you want to run. So for example, set variable to 0, and then I'll do while variable is smaller than 2, and then variable equals to variable plus 1. So here I'm increasing the value of variable by 1 every loop. So until it's greater than or equals to 2. So what will happen is that it will run 2 times until variable is equals to 2, and then the loop will break. So if I run it, and okay, so as you can see, it ran 2 times. Because the first time variable is equals to 0, it will print out this, and then variable will be then equals to 1, and then it's still smaller than 2, it will print out it another time, and then now variable will be equals to 2 now, and it's not smaller than 2, so it will break the loop. And if you want a shortcut to having an infinite loop, you can just do while true, and then the loop will just run indefinitely. And you can also break these loops when they're not supposed to. Like if the condition is still true and you want to break the loop, then just use a break keyword. So for example, and then yeah, I'll just do this. Okay, I'll put a wait. I don't know if it, whatever. So print break. Okay, so even though it says while true, the hello world will only print once, because if it gets here, it will break out of the while loop and then it will continue. So let's kind of go. So yeah, it will print hello world once, and then it will break, which is over here. So yeah, that's the while loop. So it'll keep running until the condition is false or until you break it. So next, I'll go with the for loop. So the basic syntax of the for loop is actually there are two ways to use them. The first way is to run a block of code a certain number of times. The second way, the second use of it, is to loop through a list of items and then do something with each list of the items. So I'll start with the run some code for a certain amount of time because that's easier to understand. So the syntax for, and then you have a new variable I, and then you can set the value to like anything, so like 1, and then 10, 1. So what this does is that it'll create a new variable I, and then it will run until no. So wait, let me think how to explain. So you define a new variable I, and then every loop it will increase the variable by 1 until it hits 10, and then it will break. So for example, this variable is useless now. Let's delete this. So I'll print I. So if you run it, okay. So yeah, I will keep printing. The script will keep printing I until it hits 10, and then once it hit 10, the loop will break. So you can even have it at 2, which will increment I by 2 every loop until it hits 10 or is greater than 10. So as you can see, it goes from 1, 3, 5, 7 to 9, and then it stops because the next one is 11, which is greater than 10. Okay, so that's the first use of the for loop. Run a certain block of code for a certain amount of times. Other than that, the next uses of the for loop is to loop through a list of items. So you can define a list of items in Roblox Studio. So to do that, it's the same as defining a variable because it's also technically a variable. So local list equals to, and then use the squiggly brackets thing. And then you can have like the different values that you want inside of your list. So for example, I'll do 10 and then separate each element by a comma, and then hello, 20, and 100, things like that. So for example, this list has 4 elements and they're like this. So once you have the list, we can loop through the list with a for loop. So for I value in pairs, actually I pairs list 2. Okay, so the I is the index, which basically starts from 1 and then it goes to 4 in this case because we have 4 elements. So it will go from 1 to the number of elements in your list. And then value is the actual value of the item inside of your list. So for example, in the first, so I'll just print value. Okay, so in the first run of this loop, value will be equal to 10, and the second run it will be equal to hello, and then the third one will be 20, and the fourth one is 100. And then for I, the first run will be 1, and the second will be 2, the third will be 3, and the fourth will be 4. So I'll just print I as well. So let's run it and see. Okay, so at 10, 1, hello, 2, and then 23, 100, 4. Okay, so now that you have, now you can use this for loop to go through and change properties of different objects inside of your game, which makes it extremely useful. And I'll cover that in more detail in probably a later video. Okay, so yeah, that's basically the different logic things of any scripting language: the if statements, the for loops, and the while loops, variables, and things like that. So before I end today, I'll explain one more thing. I'll show you guys how you can change properties of an object in your game, because a lot of making the game is actually just changing the different properties of a part. So for example, if you want to shoot a gun, you might want to change the bullet's velocity to the certain vector, and then it will move in that. It will have the velocity of that vector. So a lot of the game is just changing the properties of an object. So I'll show you guys how you can do that. So for example, I have this part inside of the workspace, and I want the transparency to be set to 0.5. So I want this part to be looking like that by the end of the script. Okay, so now it's at 0. So what you want to do is, first of all, you want to tell the script what part are you talking about. So like the script doesn't know if you just say part, it doesn't know that that's the part that you want to change the transparency of. So you want to define a new variable that is the part. So I'll do local part equals to, and you want to get the ancestry of the part and put it after the parentheses. So the ancestry is basically where the part is located. So for example, the part over here is currently inside of workspace, which is inside of the main game. So the ancestry of this part will be the part, and then above it is the workspace, and then above it is the entire game. And if I put it inside of the script, then the ancestry will be a part, and then script, and then server, script, service, and then the entire game. So you want to know the ancestry of the part first, and then you want to put it after these parentheses. So game, the entire game dot workspace dot part, and now the game knows that part is the part that I want to change the transparency to. So while defining this, you can actually have like relative ancestry. So for example, if I insert another part, okay, so I'll name it part 2. So if I have a part 2 that's inside of this part, so the ancestry will be part 2, and then above it is the part, and above it is the workspace, and then above it is the actual game. Instead of going game.workspace.part.part2, what you can do is you can directly go from part to part 2, and then the game will know that that is the part you're talking about. So I'll just delete the part 2 stuff. Okay. So with that, now that the game knows that you want to change the transparency of this part, now we want to actually change the transparency. So to do that, it's actually very easy. You just have to do part, and then which is the variable, and then dot, and then the name of the property, in this case is transparency, equals to the value. So it's 0.5. So that's basically the entire script. Local part equals to the part, and then part.transparency equals to 0.5. So if I run it, you can see that it turns translucent. And the thing to keep in mind is that different properties have different value types. So for example, you can't just set the part's color to 0.5, because like 0.5 is not a color value. So you need to put the correct data type for each property. So for example, you have size, position, orientation, and all these things with 3 numbers. They are called vector 3s, and you can define them with a new vector 3, with vector 3 dot new something like 0, 0, 0, which will create a new vector 3, and then you can also have like color 3 dot new, which will create a new color value. So yeah, you have all these data types that you can look up on the developer hub. I'll not go through them one by one because it will take a lot of time. So yeah, just keep in mind that while you change your transparency or like any other properties, you want to use the correct data type, or else it will throw an error, and then it will be like attempt to index transparency while like color through whatever error. So yeah, that's basically all I have for you today. So we went through basically print statements, defining variables, the loops, the if statements, and changing the properties. So with these, you can hopefully start messing around in Studio and making your own funny whatever scripts. So yeah, that's all from me today. I'll see you guys in the next video of this series. So make sure to like and subscribe if this helped, and yeah, I'll see you guys next time.